Welcome back to the Friday show presented by Woodbine Racetrack. Big stakes weekend, both Saturday and Sunday. Saturday, of course, is the Woodbine Mile, a big race field of 8. Mark Cassie's got 3 in there, including War of Will. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm here with Joe Nevills, Bloodstock editor of the Paulick Report. We're going to talk about the Bloodstock market. We've had the Fasig-Tipton sale, which was rescheduled from July in Kentucky and August in New York until just recently. They consolidated the sales here in Lexington, Kentucky. And then the Keeneland sale, which started on Sunday. They're now in book 3. Joe, what's just overall in this uncertain climate with COVID and so many other things going on, if you were to tell somebody from another planet how the horse sales are doing, what would you say?
Well, it's hard to tell someone from another planet anything based on hard numbers because we're in such uncharted territory here. I mean, the Fasig Yearling Showcase is something that's never happened before. It's making up for, several sales. The Keeneland September Sale is something that, book order changes and different horses are being offered at different times, not to mention that there's a global pandemic going on and a lot of people can't travel. So basically all you can go off on is feel. And for the horses that are selling, changing hands, the numbers are down a little bit, but it's not catastrophic. And considering all the things that I mentioned that are going on, that's not bad. There's still a bit of struggle with horses actually getting sold either through RNAs or horses scratching before their time in the ring. And that's something that's concerning. Those are a little bit high and something that's going to be worth looking at private sales, but it's not as bad as it could be. That's basically what I could go with here.
Yeah, I have a feeling that in some ways the horse industry, the bloodstock market, mirrors the general economy as far as how COVID has affected things. I think if there were flaws in a marketplace, they've been exposed a little bit more. And you'd have to think that one of the big flaws that we have in the marketplace for selling horses is probably, even though the numbers are down, the foal crop is down. They announced recently for 2021, the full crop is going to be down over 6%. I don't think we've got enough buyers or enough end users to match the number of horses that are on the market right now.
I agree. And if you look at some of the buyer lines and some of these sales, it's a lot of similar names popping up. And something else that's interesting when you look at the buyer lines is how many operations that have in the past been trusted to be steady purchasers in the 250,000 to 750,000 to $1 million range are starting to partner up and do it more frequently. The 2 million topper for Keeneland September so far was purchased by a 4-part group of Eclipse Thoroughbred partners, Robert LaPenta, Gainesway, and Winchell Thoroughbreds, and Stone Street stayed in for a piece afterward after selling the horse. So, that's 5 groups that normally would be slugging it out between each other and would probably be going to buy different horses, have instead pooled their resources to, get one horse instead. The famous Avengers that have run a lot of good runners lately, especially SF Bloodstock, Starlight, and Maddox Stables, through 3 days of Keeneland and the 2 days of Fasig-Tipton, have purchased 24 horses. That's 3 groups that, if on their own, would have probably spread out even further. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing that this is happening. This is just how owners are adapting to the marketplace, but it is something that's changing the flow of what the sales returns are looking like.
Yeah, and it's probably a little bit discouraging for people who are not part of groups because they know when they're bidding against somebody like that they've got no shot. Now, traditionally, there's a trickle-down effect of that. If somebody comes to buy horses in book 1 or book 2 and they constantly outbid, they still got the same amount of money in their pocket. They're going to spend it on book 3. I'm not sure that's happening quite as much as it used to. So I don't see the trickle-down effect happening as much with this year's sale as it has in the past. And I think a reflection of that is just the fact that there's so many RNAs right now. It's a high number.
I agree. And I think something else that's worth noting is that the international presence obviously isn't going to be as big a part of this sale season as it had in the past. In previous Keeneland Septembers, Sheikh Mohammed of Godolphin had shown up in person, and that really brought up a lot of competition and brought up a lot of prices, and he wasn't there this year, and Godolphin's presence wasn't as strong. You go into the later books, and the Koreans are often a very strong buyer once you get to books 3, 4, 5, 6. And I don't imagine they're going to buy as heavily, being as though they're not going to be here in person. Online bidding might be what it is. Maybe they have some agents on the grounds, but it's hard to sign off on a horse for big money unless you're there to look at it yourself.
And let's face it, a lot of the people who buy horses in the later books are not having as much fun this year. The racetracks are largely empty. Owners are permitted to attend the races. A lot of tracks are slowly bringing them back in. Some tracks do have spectators at a limited amount, but the game is not, plain and simple. It's not as much fun when the grandstands are completely empty. And I've heard several people who are involved in the ownership level just saying they're going to pass this year and they're going to wait and see what happens next year. The other factor is, even though the stock market has held up pretty well, the economy is not doing very well. And, I think back to the last economic calamity in 2008, that financial meltdown actually happened, I think it was day 3 or day 4 of the Keeneland September Sale, when the markets crashed and, the financial markets went into a tizzy. So that 2008 wasn't as disastrous a year for the yearlings as 2009 was, but what really happened that year was November sale, the breeding stock sale, when a lot of people had to get rid of their brood mares because of, frankly, because of loans that were outstanding, that were being called back in by the banks. I'm very interested to see what happens with the breeding stock sales later this year.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people have kept themselves informed from what happened in 2008, in that they might be a little quicker to pull the trigger on moving mares that they might have before. If you look at just strictly the numbers, the market hasn't, completely fallen out, but it's still something that you can kind of see coming, and the industry takes so long to turn the boat around when there is a downturn or when it needs to do an upturn that people might decide maybe now's my time to back out and wait for things to settle out again, instead of, riding this mare, riding this investment for a few years, seeing what happens, and maybe it's worth a fraction of what it would have been if we had sold in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, amidst all of this, sort of negative talk, I think one thing does stand out, and it's something that Keeneland's incoming president mentioned and Jeffrey Russell mentioned. They're just happy that we're having a sale.
Absolutely.
There was, I think, at one point there were concerns that it would be a very difficult thing to do, and then you have producers with products that they can't bring to market, and that is a serious crisis. Whether you're talking about horses or corn or some other product of an agricultural business. So the fact that there's a sale is good news. I think everybody expected the markets to be down. Let's just hope that there's a recovery next year or the year after.
Yeah, only one way to find out.
All right, well, let's go to Woodbine. They put together a good stakes card Saturday, and of course on Sunday there's a couple of win in your ins. But on Saturday, the Woodbine Mile's got a field of 8. Mark Cassie's got 3 in there, including War of Will, a Grade 1 winner on dirt in the Preakness Stakes, and this year a Grade 1 winner on turf at Keeneland, and he's going to try to do it again in the Woodbine Mile.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. This is a very different looking Woodbine Mile than previous years because of all the travel restrictions. Usually the Woodbine Mile manages to grab some international horses. Usually Aidan O'Brien has a horse or two coming over. Usually some jockeys come up from North America or from Europe, but it's a very Canadian jockey rank this year, and who they've chosen to ride has been very interesting too, because these have been a lot of different regular riders on here on the same horses, and their choices here are going to have a pretty big bearing on what happens.
Yeah, as I look at this field, there's one horse that's entered in both the Woodbine Mile and the Singspiel Stakes. That's Admiralty Pier. There's not a lot of speed in this race, and I noticed that one of Mark Cassie's horses, Olympic Runner, might be in there just to ensure a fast pace, or to ensure that none of the other horses gets an easy lead. And that could be Admiralty Pier or Starship Jubilee, the mare who's just had a phenomenal career. I think he wants to make sure that neither one of those gets away with an easy lead.
Yeah, and you mentioned Starship Jubilee. I think she's probably going to be the one that I end up picking in this race. She's 6 for 13 on this turf course at Woodbine. She's last year's Canadian Horse of the Year. She's coming back to Woodbine for the first time in a while. She gets Justin Stein on board, who's been having a fantastic meet. She's got every right to do what she needs to do here. One other that I'm going to be curious. I don't necessarily know if he's going to win or not, but I think we're all curious to see how Sherrill Spite does in this race after all of the hype machine that was behind him going into this year's Kentucky Derby. Obviously, he wasn't able to make the race, but he's trying it here. He's going to be trying against older horses, going to be trying against on turf. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, he debuted going seven furlongs on the turf. He won by 8 lengths, I believe, and then he won a race on the Tapeta surface up there. And he didn't have a shot to win the Kentucky Derby. I didn't think he was just too green, but he's trained by Roger Atfield, the dean of Canadian trainers, the greatest Canadian trainer in my opinion. He's won a lot of big races. Roger has, probably with horses that most people discounted. He's a wild card in there for sure, but I can't. It's a big ask for him in his 3rd career start to go against horses like this.
Picks up Kazuchi Kimura though in the seat, so that's he's a really good rider. Last year's champion apprentice jockey for North America won the Eclipse Award, so very trustworthy rider in the irons. Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about a guy from the United States, trainer named Chad Brown. He's known to win a few grade 1s on the turf.
And he's probably going to be my second pick. Looking at value proposition, anytime that Chad Brown and Clairvich Sable go barnstorming on the turf, usually things are going to happen. And in a race that lacks a lot of international flavor in terms of European influence, this is a British-bred horse, son of Dansley, gets Contreras in the saddle, who's a very good rider, and again, it's Chad Brown on the turf. If Chad Brown is on the turf, you must pay attention, especially in big spots.
And that's why he's my pick to win this race. I don't really, War of Will is a good horse. Starship Jubilee has had a tremendous career, and she's won so many big races up there. She loves that turf course. But I'm just going to go with value proposition. Chad Brown has such a deep bench that he can pick and choose which horses fit which races, and he knows what he's doing. And at the end of the race, if you see a Chad Brown that goes off at 6 or 7 to 1 and he wins it, you just think, how did I let that happen? Yeah. So I'm going to go with value proposition. Who do you like?
I'm going to go with Starship Jubilee here as my top pick. Value proposition is my saver, just in case I need to say I told you so later. I was talking about jockeys making decisions earlier. Luis Contreras was the regular Woodbine rider for Starship Jubilee, gets on value proposition. So if the jockey choice angle means anything to you, that's something to pay attention to. But I'm going to stick with Starship Jubilee. She's the top Canadian, and she can do that until it proves otherwise.
All right, Joe. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate your insights on especially on the bloodstock market, which you've been following very carefully over the years, and your insights on the Woodbine Mile. So that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Friday Show. We'll see you next week.